information, it will be diffused via 2 channels. And we are expecting hundreds of people like most of the time, and it will be diffused all over the globe. So the good thing about this time, it will be in Europe, in Africa, and in the whole American continent. And then we will also diffuse the video. Okay, so we are now on YouTube and we are now recorded. Okay, we start. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. We are very excited to host with the Berkeley Global Society and all our friends from Peru this discussion. This discussion is included in LATAM 3, which is a series of conferences in the whole continent. We have been learning from many people about many topics covering Peru, Colombia, covering also Ecuador, Brazil. And as I said, we are delighted today to be with you. Of course, we regret that it is online, but we are expecting to be soon in Lima to have again a conversation all together. I would like to warmly thank all the experts joining this table. I also would like to thank Suzanne for coordinating this event. Suzanne, you are professor teaching in Peru, and the floor is yours to start this conference. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you very much, Oban, and welcome everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this roundtable about environmental regulation in times of COVID-19. As Oban said, here from Lima, Peru, and Brazil, because one of our panelists is from Brazil, we are thrilled to host this event. I am Susan Isla, alumni from UC Berkeley and also member of Berkeley Global Society. First of all, I want to thank to Berkeley Global Society for having this space to talk about how the humanity had to reinvent itself to face this new reality brought by COVID-19, and how things have been done here in our region to face this pandemic. Thanks, Oban, and all the team that gave us support to have this space to talk. Just as a brief introduction to our roundtable, and maybe it's probably obvious to say that the global outbreak of COVID-19 had affected every part of human life, and the measures taken to control the spread of this virus had affected our social life, our economy, education, travel, industries. The other side, and the bright side of the actual situation, is the positive effects on the environment and climate, such as air quality and reduction in power pollution in different parts of the world, due to movement restriction and significant slowdown of social and economic activities. Nowadays, we have to face a new way to do things, and probably this new way will lead us to improve our actions in our social life, economy, education, and industry. Also, the impact of COVID-19 gave us light to improve our environmental regulation, and that is what we are going to talk about this time. Said that, I am thrilled to present our talented speakers that join us for this roundtable. On the beginning, we have Andrés Dulanto. Andrés is a law professor at Universidad Científica del Sur, and he is in charge of the Environmental Law and Biodiversity Regulation Clinic. I also must remark and must say that recently Andrés held the first environmental mood in Peru and in the region, where as a society we had the chance to discover the new talents on environmental law. We had alumnus and students from Peru, Argentina, and also Brazil. Andrés earned an LLM in business law with the highest honors by Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, and has a specialization in environmental management by Universidad Complutense de Madrid in Spain. Currently, Andrés is the chief of the legal project management area in the Peruvian Environmental Assessment and Enforcement Agency, OEFA. Andrés is going to talk to share with us the challenge and risk in the public environmental management in times of COVID. Please, Andres, go ahead. We are ready to hear you.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Susan, for the invitation. Thank you, the Berkeley Global Society, Ovan. And I want to greet also the fellow professionals here today, Maria Antonieta and Enrique. Soon our Dean of the Faculty of Universidad Científica del Sur will be here with us, Oscar Sumar. I want to thank him also for the opportunity to be in charge of the Environmental Law Clinic, which is a course and an initiative very dear to me, and I want to thank him for that also. I want to start this presentation. I have a PPT. So a few slides that I want to share with you. First of all, Susan, I want to confirm that you're viewing the slides. Yes? Okay, thank you. So if in any part of the presentation I'm not well, my Wi-Fi is not always well. This is a code by the COVID because everyone is connected at the same time. But I'm going to do the best effort to be next to the Wi-Fi. Well, this presentation is called Peru Challenges of Environmental Regulation Amid COVID-19. The introduction, I already did that. I just want to give a little shout out to Universidad Científica del Sur and the Environmental Law Litigation Clinic because we are working in different projects that we're going to share with you next in the presentation and are related a little bit to this COVID pandemic. So I want to start first with the COVID-19 implications in Peru. As you know, this is updated, the 64 million people with COVID is updated yesterday. Peru was, until I think the last month, we were one of the we were in the top of the ranking of the most cases around the world. Even though we are a medium population country with 30 to 33 million people, we have one of the highest index of cases in the world. And now we are not in the top 10, but we're still with one of the most sad statistics in the COVID pandemic. We are the deadliest, or we were the deadliest COVID hotspot in LATAM and in all the world, with 35,000 deaths and 3.73 lethality. We have one of the highest deaths per citizen or per million in the world. So we must know this context in order to address the different implications of the regulations that we are going to see next in this presentation. This led also to a political crisis, and it's good to know the context we are in. We had 3 presidents in almost 1 month. There are there were many protests here that not were directly related to COVID, but I think the economic crisis due to the shutdowns of many industries could have led to this situation. We are recovering from this, and now we have Presidente Sagasti. We're trying, the cases are slowing, and we do not have the same amount of deaths that we had in previous months. But I think it's important to know that we are in a context of presidential elections also, and we had 3 presidents in 1 month. It could sound like a joke, but it isn't. I saw on Twitter that Argentinians, Ecuadorians, and Peruvians were joking about who had the most presidency in 1 single month. And we thought we had, but the record it's from Ecuador. They had around 5 presidents in 1 month. So this is important to know because the regulation is being shaped by different leaders in our country. So we do not have exactly one standard. In a same year, we could have different standards of regulation, and we are going to see a little bit more about that in the next slides. Government reaction, adapting regulation for a new coexistence. That's what this new phase was called by President Vizcarra. First of all, I want to talk about different choices that the presidents and regulators in every country have. First of all, the academics and the academy stated that no or little regulation could lead to an high fatality rate, while gradual and partial restrictions could diminish the number of deaths, and strong restrictions such as curfews and social isolation could end up in a low fatality rate. What did the Peruvian government do? First of all, in the initial phase around March, April, the first case we had was in March the 1st, I believe. The government passed different laws and regulations. First, according or related to civil rights and freedoms restricted, the freedom of transit was restricted during curfew, and the government dictated the social isolations for all the regions in Peru. And the inviolability of the home, let's say the army could enter in a home if they were suspicious that the people wasn't complying with the regulations stated by the Peruvian government. Today, it's a little bit different because we have, yes, we have freedom of transit unless we are under or during the curfew, which is from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. At the beginning of the pandemics, it was from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. At the beginning of the pandemics, the vehicles were prohibited only unless it was to some industries, such as the food industry, because supermarkets must continue in order to provide food and goods to the population. And now that we have free circulation, except during curfew, and the taxi, it's allowed during curfew, only for emergency purposes. Most industries now may render services or provide goods. For example, there are a lot of restrictions in how many people could enter into a same space, and also some spaces such as gyms are prohibited until now, or are shut down until now. I put the image of the President Vizcarra because we were the first restrictions, the first regulation for COVID passed during his mandate back in March. Effects of COVID-19 regulation on the environment. These two photos are photos from Lima. It was said, and MINAM, which is the Ministry of the Environment in Peru, said that the levels of air pollution improved during the first stages of this pandemic in March, April, and May. But and this was also not only in Peru. We had a little bit of the descent of or decrease of the greenhouse effect gases in China. For example, there's a satellite photo of China. In the left, the pollution is more yellow and red, and we see that in February there's not as much pollution as in the previous month. It was said that 25% of the emissions in China decreased, and 150 million of metric tons of CO2 stopped being thrown to the environment. The positive impacts we also see, we saw the positive impacts in Lima also, which is the capital city of Peru, with 6 tons of CO2 per day, and 90,000 tons of carbon dioxide in only 15 days. In only 50 days of restrictions, vehicle restrictions. Also in the noise pollution field, we had positive outcomes. For example, 110 decibels average per day. We stopped listening to that. And so we had positive effects in the environment. But I was listening to a presentation by a UCLA professor yesterday, and they say one thing that it's clear: these are temporary changes. These not are changes that are lasting. So we need to focus on what can we copy, what can we continue to do during normal context without pandemic. COVID-19 regulation impacts on the environment, on the environmental supervision and enforcement. Has the environmental supervision stopped amid COVID-19? That was one of the first questions that I was wondering, because I didn't used to work at OEFA back then. I didn't work in OEFA back then at the beginning of the pandemics here in March. So I have to look for news, and I found this one. The curfews and the first regulations related to COVID were passed on March the 16th, and this is news from March 18th. There was a supervision that was carried out in the due to a complaint received for a hydrocarbon spill in the Sea of Paita, which is in the north of Peru. So the authorities didn't stop their work. They went to that part of Peru to both the CAPI and OEFA, which are the authorities in charge of the supervisions, to take actions and work with the company to solve this problem. But in numbers, because the numbers and the statistics don't lie, the supervision never stopped, but supervisions decreased in 36.2% from 2019 to 2020. We can see in the left the number of supervisions in the first quarter and in the second quarter of 2019, which were 1,273 supervisions or specific actions by the environmental enforcement agencies, while in 2020 there was only 111. Could be a reason that some companies were in shutdown, but also because the efforts of the agencies, of the enforcement agencies, stopped a little bit due to the protection of the workers of the government. And so that's one statistic that I wanted to share with you. Also, both OEFA follow-up action on the enforcement actions by other environmental enforcement institutions, because OEFA, it's the ente rector, which means that it leads the environmental enforcement, but it's not the only one that does this task in the Peruvian government. It also helped to do supervision actions to other enforcement entities around Peru, and it decreased the number of supervisions that OEFA did to other entities. Yes, I'm going to fast a little bit because I'm almost finished. In the second statistic, we can see the number of complaints filed by citizens, which also decreased. Environmental deregulation in Peru amid COVID-19 or regulation. There were two attempts to deregulate first our laws and a regulation about environmental permits that the companies must have prior to begin their work or their projects, and also one that presented by UPP to promote mining in the rainforest. There were different attempts to deregulate in the environmental field, and that is concerning because we must continue to follow the path to economic growth without stopping the environmental regulation in our countries. Lack of regulatory impact analysis also because different laws were passed, and this is a little bit of a joke episode that everyone saw in Peru. A husband and her wife were discussing because he couldn't take out his dog to a walk. It was prohibited. The government forgot about the animal rights, and it is a sign of how good or bad we are thinking our regulation before passing it. So we must think about that too. At the end of this, I have 3 learnings and 1 concern. The 3 learnings: do not stop. First of all, supervision actions must continue in case of a state of emergency, such as the pandemic, and the state officials must be empowered to fulfill their functions. They must continue at the same level prior to the emergency. We must think in all scenarios. Regulatory impact assessment should not stop even though the government have to take quick measures to stop an emergency or to tackle a disease. So we must think in all scenarios. Third, how to replicate the positive aspects in a regular context. COVID-19 regulation has proven to be effective in reducing air pollution because the industries were in a shutdown. We must replicate good practices in a regular context. I put 2 examples there. Do we continue with pico y placa, vehicle restrictions in certain dates? Or we do a day without cars? That is going to be effective or not? And the main concern after all of this is how do we recover our way to economic growth without stopping the commitment to reduce greenhouse gases? This is a statistic, and I didn't found one from Peru, so I put one from the European Union. The amount of greenhouse gases decreased in 2020, but they are projected to increase in the following years. How do we do to recover our path to economic growth, but to a sustainable economic growth? That is the question that we must discuss in this next month, because this was this space had a space of time had positive effects, but we are going to continue with the need to grow to get out of the poverty. We are a country that has a high number of, well, not as much as in the 90s, but we still have poverty in Peru, and we must continue to fulfill our goals to reduce poverty and to improve environment in our countries. So that's it. I want to thank again the Berkeley Global Society for this space, and Susan for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andres, for your quality presentation, and it was very clear and explain all the things that we are going through this long year. Now, I have a question. Probably our panelists maybe can share with us also. My question will be: do you think that is advisable, recommended to produce a specific environmental regulation to prevent environmental impacts during a pandemic? We must to shape, when we have this emergency situation, we have to shape our regulation?
Well, it will depend on the specific sector and situation. It is not the best way for a government to pass declarative regulations aimed at ratifying that certain obligations are still in force. We have seen that in Peru. Many Supreme decrees stating that, for example, plastic obligations, the goals the companies must fulfill are still in force. But those kind of those kind of regulations doesn't add up to the goal of having a good environmental statistics. We must see if there's a change in the specific context, and we must produce a specific regulation to that situations. But declarative regulation that we had during the pandemics in Peru doesn't fulfill their goals. So I recommend to do a research of the specific situation and propose regulation according to that.
Okay, thank you, Andres.
May I ask a question myself, please? Okay, so Andres, what do you think could be done differently to prevent impacts on the environmental enforcement during pandemics or situations similar to COVID-19?
Okay, excuse me, Maria Antonia, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. What do you think could be done differently to prevent impacts on the environmental enforcement during pandemics or situations similar to COVID-19?
Okay, so a pandemic is not an excuse to exempt from procedures as important as the regulatory impact assessment or to stop the procedures of the environmental enforcement agency. We must change from written procedures here in Peru. We start to do that in many entities of our country to a digital procedure to continue the analysis that enforcement agencies must do, and it mustn't stop because we did the supervisions prior to the pandemics and to the state of emergency, and we must continue to do that analysis during the pandemic, and we can we must continue to do that analysis in order to have measures or adequate measures to tackle the environmental problems that are being followed by our enforcement entities.
Okay, Andres, thank you so much for all the presentation and the answers that we can hear here with you. And please stay with us so we can share with Maria Antonieta and Enrique. Now we are going to present our next panelist, Maria Antonieta Merino. Maria Antonieta is a lawyer graduated from Universidad de Lima. She earned a Master of Laws in New York University and has studies in regulation from the London School of Economics. She has been an external consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank, the OECD, and the German Cooperation. Actually, she's a senior associate consultant at Smart Regulation Peru and also professor at Universidad del Pacífico, Universidad de Ciencias Aplicadas en Perú, and Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, México. Maria Antonieta is going to talk about the challenges of environmental regulation in COVID times. Please, Maria Antonieta, go ahead. We are ready to hear you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you again for the invitation to you and to Oban, and of course to the Berkeley Global Society for these kind of invitations. Really a pleasure to be here talking in this panel with these top professionals. And well, it's very difficult to probably to address such a complex topic in 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to use one slide because that slide basically covers mainly all the topics that I'm going to talk with you today. So please do let me know if you can see it, the presentation, the PPT. Is it good?
It's fine.
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Okay, so basically, as Andres already mentioned, it's been quite difficult times for all countries, especially for less developed countries, which needs to not only to tackle this pandemic or this crisis, but also need to do it covering a wide range of situations that we as less developed countries have and need to face. The lack of resources on health and on health provision, poverty, informal work. So basically, we need to do our best. And when we have this so many fragile states and so we can govern governments, the challenge is even greater for anybody, for any government. So as Andres put very nicely, just to see how the political situation in Peru and in these countries, to show us how difficult it is to set down strategies and regulations that could cope with all these challenges, specifically in environmental challenges. And now it's not over. The pandemic is barely over, and we need to cover a lot more of issues that it's been unfolded yet. But what is interesting is now we need to think about the future and whether the regulation is a tool to cope with this situation. It's a tool that could be improved in order to gather a better environmental protection, or if it will collide with other objectives, as for instance, the promotion of stability, or perhaps sustainability in terms of economic sustainability or labor sustainability. So there are lots of challenges, as you might see, but I just wanted to talk about these specific issues that I put on the presentation. Perhaps we shouldn't talk about changing regulations objectives per se, but what I wanted to let you know is that it will be two stages, like two situations differently, before pandemic and after pandemic. And we mustn't see regulations as something that is a stick and not changeable in time. Rather, it's the opposite. Regulation should be considered viewed as a way of producing solutions that will tackle what is needed in current times, and also need to fulfill a process that is more like kind of iteration. So when we think about regulation, we think something. We must think about something that needed to be changed during time, considering the requirements of the present situation, the requirements of society. And now that we need to face these challenges, society as a whole, perhaps the change could be of how the regulation promote or foster greater solutions for sustainability in the future. Perhaps our main concern now would be, okay, we have done this in terms of achievable objectives, which are great, reducing pollution, reducing emissions, but I think we need to cover it broadly in terms of how beyond that we can achieve objectives that we can use as sustainability aims. And so present environmental regulations as a tool for development itself, rather than putting this dichotomy between environmental protection and economic production or fostering. Then that challenge among these two topics could be embraced and and considered as a whole rather than opposite objectives. The other element that I found very interesting in that is because we have continually producing laws and regulations during this pandemic, we haven't had the time as countries to look what have we done in terms of the regulations and whether these decisions were efficient, were the good ones, were sound regulations. So I think when this pandemic start to dilute a little bit more, we need to think of evaluation, or to assess or to appraise these regulations. So it's possible for us to determine if while we issue these regulations, produces more impacts in terms of environmental concerns. For instance, it's obvious for everybody that we're used to use these more plastics and discarded materials because it is in terms of health concerns rather than environmental concerns. But now I think it's time to determine whether there could be other ways to tackle the same problem in a more broadly sense, sustainable sense, and to evaluate all the possible unintended environmental and negative impacts that we have been produced. I think that when we talk about the challenge between how to focus on the environmental impact regulation and also economic promotion, we need to think that they can merge and they can be, we can co-create solutions. For instance, everybody now probably is not looking at how to produce in formal ways their activities, or how they can create the same beans or the same products that usually they created before the pandemic. And they're not considering topics as environmental topics at all, because it's a burden. It's considered as a burden for people who engage in formal activities. But if regulation helps these companies, these persons, in a way that made possible financial support, if they introduces these environmental improvements inside the activities, then this is a way of how regulation could help in providing these measures of support whenever it's possible. I think that not in all cases will be possible, but in some ways it is possible. So it's interesting when Andres talk about the supervision and enforcement things, which I think they're clearly an objective of regulation per se. But if we need, or we try to combine these enforcement activities with incentives, with a little bit more soft regulation, or with financial support, with other measures, perhaps we will find like a balance between the activities done by the person, the companies, and the government. And we can achieve a more important objective in the end. The other issue is that maybe during this time, not considered also that what we have done probably was against what we already have done in terms of environmental protection. And the idea is not to roll back existing environmental standards as part of recovery plans. So it is not that not to lighten burdens, but also how could be without reducing these standards to achieve them in a more easily fashioned way, rather than just think of them in terms of a burden. So there, the government has a very difficult task, because they need to be creative. They need to think about how my regulations, how my standards could work in this environment, in this specific environment, and how can these regulations incentivize the activities rather than putting off or putting aside all what have we been produced and achieved. And in this sense, I think that the promotion of technology, of the use of technology will help. Our countries, Peru, as less developed countries, do not have technology that will help the assessment of some issues while considering regulation. And now we have seen that when there is a crisis, technology is of great help. So I think this crisis might constitute, like, rather than an obstacle, an opportunity to think about, and more broadly, about the use of technology. How could we, as government, as institution, could be more targeted in our objective, more efficient, to apply more coherence, more transparency also, while dealing in the design or shaping the regulations. And that will really help to shape and to inform the policies that we are applying. And to do so, Andres already mentioned that, but I wanted to have a few words related on this. There is a tool that maybe can help us, and is the regulatory impact assessment tool. So sometimes the regulatory impact assessment, or RIA, it's been looked at a very difficult tool to apply because it's too sophisticated, because it needs you to have lots of time and resources to do it, and because you don't have the time to do it amidst a pandemic. So there are lots of considerations around the use of this tool, but I don't think that should be the case, even though we are in the middle of a health crisis like this, the one that we're facing now. We can still apply the tool. For instance, you don't have information, you don't have this technology to do the calculations, you don't have any idea how to tackle a precise, specific objective. But do you have experts? Do you have persons who can deliver you or help to deliver a better solution? You have the society itself to give you information and data. You have the companies and people who are inside in the middle of the crisis with you, trying to seek and to find solutions. So it is not something that the government needs to do it by itself. It's something that needs to think of ways of co-producing something, and is the way that, or the path that we need to consider in the long run. Because this pandemic could be a very specific one, but we will find ourselves in different crises in the future. So it's a change of mindset, and yes, of course, to apply the regulatory impact assessment, usually you will need to have lots of time and resources. And amidst a crisis, you wouldn't have that time and resources, but you still can put yourself in a position where you need to consider all relevant options and which one will have the most benefits considering the cost, and which one will be good enough to be applied. So at the end, what it is important is just to find the strength and to search for a political commitment for all governments to apply or to think outside the box, to think more broadly about regulations, to think about the impacts, to think about in terms of sustainability, to think about in the long term, not only inside or just for the pandemic considerations, because we will be changed after this crisis, and we will not be longer the same society. So it's a more intelligent way of producing regulations that would help especially less developed countries as Peru. Well, that will be my presentation. Thank you so much again for the invitation, and I will be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Maria Antonieta, for this enlightenment about impact or challenge in the environmental regulation that we are facing now for the COVID, and most important, what we have to face past the COVID and what we have to maintain for improve our regulation in this main topic. I have one question related to this. Do you think that from COVID-19, should the objective of environmental regulation be changed? Do we need to change it after or to face the next state from COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because I think that everybody will agree with me if that we wouldn't like to change anything in terms of achievable objective of reducing pollution or reducing GHG gases, or I think everybody will agree with me that we need to go in that direction and to try to achieve this Sustainable Development Goals agenda. But perhaps we produced or shaped our regulations very narrowly, not in more broadly sense. And we need to consider now that how these aims could be sustainable in the long run, and how these aims could be gathered together in other objectives that I have as a country. For instance, how to recover after the pandemic in terms of economy, in terms of health, in terms of security. And in doing so, it is important that when you do it, to think about all possible or potential alternatives that you will have, and to think clearly how you can achieve that, how can you promote that. And this is a way of looking regulation very, it's not as static, but rather than it not changeable, but adaptable. As human beings, we are adaptable. So not looking at those factors will be a mistake, I think. So we need to focus a little bit more on that and try to think about our regulations and potentially how prevent or limit potential crises in the future that might happen.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer, Maria Antonieta.
Susan, you allow me to jump into the conversation?
Yes, please go ahead, Enrique.
I have a question. Thank you, Maria Antonieta, for your presentation. Very interesting. As you mentioned, we are facing different challenging time, but you said several times it's not the last one. Probably it will be really frequent in the next years. And we have these problems with these regulations, like if law is, I think most of us here and most of our public are lawyers. Law takes a time to change, right? Law, it's not it doesn't follow the speed of in the industry, technology, and pandemics. Like our answers are really slow because, of course, it needs to go through a lot of discussion. So, as you said, we need to implement regulations regarding the environment. How can we make it faster, or how can we make it that it can adapt faster? What kind of measures we should put in our regulations, in our environmental regulations, that it can answer faster, mainly seeing moments like this?
Mm-hmm. Well, when as lawyers, as you mentioned very clearly, Enrique, we think of regulations, and when we produce a regulation and we deliver a regulation, we're just considering the time when it is passed or is approved. But after it is approved or issued, then we forget about regulation and just we measure the regulations in terms of whether it achieved the objectives. But it's just it's a photograph of the moment. after it is issued, then happen to be a lot of other interesting things in our reality that will need to force us to look at a little bit deeper in our regulation. And that what is interesting about the regulatory impact assessment is that it helps us to understand and to assess whether this regulation was useful or not. Does it achieve the objectives or not? And then again, as I mentioned, regulation should be considered in a process and in an iterative process. So it's go back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards, and it will never end. So if you're considering that, for instance, I issue a regulation for the moment 2000, for instance, and then another one for 2010, another one for 2020. And then again, in 10 years, you're issuing another regulation without considering your past actions. Maybe you are forgetting something. And maybe that could feed back into your shaping or inform your policy better in order to produce a better regulation in the future. But then again, you cannot foresee the future. So you, as an other regulator, will have a challenge. And what it is important to see is perhaps the regulation isn't wrong. It just needs to be adapted a little bit broader or in a different way. So it's like the changes of the human being is the same as the changes of environment, is the same as the changes of regulation. It shouldn't be considered as a very static instrument where everything around it is variable. So that would be the way of looking at regulation, in my view.
If you allow me one more question, because it's the way you see it is really interesting, because mainly I work in development banks, and I think this is really important. Like the assessment, and as you work in IDB and everything, I think assessment is a key here. Who should monitor this? And you talk about technology and civil society. Who should take the lead, or who should take this assessment and this feedback retroalimentation?
It's interesting, because in different countries this task is being assigned to different persons. So it's interesting when you're considering just a assessment in terms of economic of if its effectiveness, then you're just looking one very narrow approach, and that will be, for instance, a bank could say, I'm gonna do this assessment in terms of efficiency because I need to look about the economic effects, how the budget or the financial stability of the regulation could be looked at after its implementation. But in that way, you will forgetting to look other impacts that maybe can add into your equation. So as long as there are considerations to produce these regulations before, the same way should be like in a mirror, an evaluation or assessment or appraisal, if you want, of these same concerns afterwards. And this is a challenge. And this is a challenge because you need to fit this, the outcomes of your assessment in terms of how to inform new policies or better policies, being transparent and coherent. And sometimes the methodologies of both could be divergent. But although a challenge, this is an interesting one, and a very, for me, it's not only interesting, but very necessary one, because it's the only way that you can't prevent of issuing regulations without knowing its objectives, or perhaps without considering that it will be producing the effects you want in the future, and without reflecting your own actions. So maybe your answer, which is really difficult, the question you have made, it's a very difficult one. Maybe it's perhaps if we institutionalize this assessment, then we have this coordination among the parties, which is difficult. And then again, we need to consider all around it. But in doing so, perhaps technology, perhaps a different view of doing things could help in this better approach. It's something that we need to consider further, I think, but that will be the lead or the path that I believe we need to walk if we want better or informed regulations.
Professor Maria, if you allow me, and Enrique also, I will jump in the conversation. You have two observations I would like to share with you. The first one, when we were preparing this LATAM, and we are working on it for the last 2-3 years, usually people talk about M&A, about GDPR, IP, startup, but for the first time, everyone wants to talk about Amazonia and environment. So you can see from Brazil, from Chile, so you can see that people want to talk about it. And the second observation is, for the last 2 years, international organizations are suffering and very criticized. So you were talking about coordinated actions. I'm from Europe. So I would like to know what should be the methodology, what should be the tools in order to have a coordinated actions between those countries? Because in the private sectors, with PPP, it works. So what's missing? And you started to talk about technology. And it was also beginning of answer with the people from the heart of the Amazonia saying, let's use the technology in order to support environment. So what both of you think about it, please?
Okay. Please, Enrique, if you want to go first, that's okay.
No, please, it's your panel. I jump in, and
no, it's
you
perfect.
made me rethink my presentation, Alvin. Alban, you made me rethink what I would talk about in the next 10 minutes. I will try to assess these points.
But I want the answer from Maria also. Huh?
Okay, so yeah. Well, if you look at how governments develop and how we're talking about how governments were increased in terms of institutions, in terms of topics, in terms of sectors, then of course it's going to be difficult to manage and to do the coordination because everybody will think about their own aims, their own objectives, their own goals, and where it combines, and it's kind of impossible sometimes to think about it. So technology, it is a very important tool, and we are considering talking about e-governmenting, big data in the future, or the use of how to gather all these data in order to produce better informed and more transparent solutions. Or, of course, it will pose other challenges that perhaps we can discuss in a different panel, maybe if you want. But just now it occurs to me that, yes, for instance, all these international organizations produce it's very useful, the information, and how this information can feed back again into the regulation, and how the information produced by one institution feed back also in this regulation, or perhaps the aims of the efforts of Brazil in the Amazonia can feed also into the regulations of Peru or Colombia or other countries. That's a very interesting topic, because when we look at very narrowly and we just consider in paper and numbers, it's difficult. But when we think about a more broad objective, without just not making it in the clouds, but a little bit more precise of that, but we can find ways of solutions, cooperations. Maybe we can share databases. Maybe we can think of ways of exchange information to settle down topics, because the Amazonia is currently partage between these 3 countries. It's not the possession of one over the other. So, and we are going to deal with those topics in the future, and regulation will need to face these challenges in the future. How to deal with the exchange of information of that data among persons. How to deal with, for instance, cross-boundaries issues. So it's just look outside our bubble and see the world, how it's evolving. And then if that's the way of evolution, the regulation should accompany that evolution as well, which will pose us a lot of challenges for the regulatory body, but it will need to assess or at least consider it in this point, because later I think it's going to be too late for that.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Maria Antonieta. And we have here a question from one of the participants, Manuel de la Torre. He's asking you, what do you think is the problem with some mining projects that comply with environmental regulation, but they can start some economics suggest to boost the economy?
It's an interesting question, and I don't think it's my view. It's just my view. I'm talking as Maria Antonieta and as a professor or someone else. I don't think that. Maybe there could be some issues regarding the design of some regulations that could be seen a little bit more in detail, but it is not issuing a regulation the last or ultimate task. It is also important to implement that regulation. And I think when we're talking about conflicts, we're talking about how the law of the regulation is being implemented in our countries. In paper, it seems that everything is perfect. But when you apply the regulation, apparently there is it's a gap between what people think about the regulation, what is expecting about the project, what is doing the government, and what is going to do or is done by the company or the investment. So if we see all these conflicts around Latin America, for instance, on environmental issues, perhaps it is because not only the regulation, it lacks of transparency, but it's the process of how to apply the regulation who lacks of transparency. And then in the end, without transparency, you don't have confidence. You as indigenous people, as communities, you cannot trust the government. You cannot trust even less the company. So if just is in position, but you are not considering that the whole picture, it's a co-producing of solutions, a co-production of solutions between different partners, then it's very difficult to deal with this issue. And you always face a strong opposition. But maybe it's not, I mean, perhaps we can, correct some issues in the design of things, but it's how the way is implemented and how the people is participating on those in those processes, which is not transparent, and therefore it faces, then the government face a lot of opposition as well of investment. Even though you present the perfect opportunity of investment with all the best standards, environmental standards, if you are not transparent, you will likely not succeed on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria Antonieta. And now, thank you very much for your time and the kindly answer our questions. Now we are going to pass to our next expositor is Enrique Pisaya. He is he's a lawyer from Brazil and also alumni from Berkeley and member of PGS. Nowadays, Enrique serves as a chief of staff of the executive presidency and general coordinator of strategic alliances for Fomplata Development Bank in Brazil. Related to his work experience, Enrique has worked in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and held office for 6 years in the Ministry of Planning of Brazil. And on behalf of that country, he has held positions on board directories, banks, and funds dedicated to national and international development. Also, he has worked in the United Nations, where he represented the International Fund for Agricultural Development before the Council of Food Security. It's important to mention that Enrique has a PhD in international economics from the University of International Businesses and Economic in Beijing, China. This morning, we had the pleasure to listen to Enrique and to learn about the impact of COVID on Green Growth Project. Please, Enrique, we are ready to hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, and congratulations for organizing this forum with this distinguished panelists. It's a pleasure for me to join a panel with Maria Antonieta and Andres. Also, Oscar, I hope he brings us the final words. And also thank to Alban for this great initiative to bring us together in the Berkeley Global Society. It's a pleasure to be an alumni from Berkeley and to be a member of this society. I think we have a lot to contribute to the world with our knowledge. I think we have really great people among us, and we should do this more. I know Albin is doing a lot, and I think we can even do a lot more. Albin or Alban, my French not that good. So, well, I was planning to talk some things, but after these conversations, I took a U-turn of some things I was going to talking about. Yes, the COVID, I will start with the COVID. COVID is changing our lives a lot. Some minutes ago, right before the event, we were discussing our security board in Plata, where I work. Our headquarters are in Bolivia. So we were discussing when we will get back to the office, when. And the thing is, we were planning the next 2 months. It's a real new situation. Like, we're never talking about 2 months ahead. We were always talking about planning 6 months, 1 year, and we are talking about 2 months. And everything is if in 2 months the vaccine is widespread, if the frontiers don't close, if the flights are back to normal, so we are planning this the short term in a real short term, and with a lot of uncertainties. So when we talk about development, and we talk about development in the world, this changed the whole reality, because development projects, they take, in the best case scenario, 4 years. So if you want to build a road, if you want to build a bridge, if you want to do a school or a integrated development project, it will take at least 4 years, like somewhere around 2 to 8, sometimes even further. So if we have these uncertainties for 2 months, what can we talk about in the next 10 years? And passing through what Maria Antonieta said, we need the regulations, and the regulations will change. So the regulations we had today about indigenous people or green growth or COVID or pandemic or health, they change, and they bring a lot of uncertainty. And mainly when we talk about green growth, the things change a lot, because when we are talking here in LATAM, so we are talking about Latin America, mainly South America, and focus on Peru, the world has a need of investment in infrastructure around $4 trillion. It's $4 trillion. It's a lot of money. We talk about 100 trillion until 2040. So we need to find money. We need to mobilize money to bring infrastructure to the countries to catch up. $100 trillion until 2040. And when we go down, we come to South America, we are talking about countries that are far behind the infrastructural needs. So Peru, for example, is in the position of 111 in the World Bank Index, Logistic Index, among 160 countries. So we need a lot of money to invest in infrastructure in Peru. We've talked about Bolivia, they are in 130 position. The average of South America is 85th position. So we need to mobilize these funds, and they compete, of course, with green growth. So how can I convince politicians, how can I convince population that we need green growth, we need green regulations, we need sustainable development if we need to build roads. And more than that, if you need to build roads and a bridge to connect our countries, because our countries are not well connected, our countries are not as Europe nowadays, right? We don't have we don't have even railroads in most of our countries, like, or at least a good average of railroads. We don't have, we talk a lot about bioceanic corridors. We talk a lot about connecting Pacific with Atlantic through Santos in Brazil to Peru. So how can we connect? How can we find this amount of money and invest in green growth? How can we tell people, hey, you need a more expensive road. You need to use cycleways. You need to use parking. We need to close the roads in our cities for cars, and people need to walk. And also people have this dream of having a car, and also we have to preserve the environment. So how can we do this? Like, this is the main challenge. And more than that, CEPAL, that's the United Nations Economic Forum, Organization for Latin America, they last year in their home survey, they show that in Latin America, 20% of the people are below poverty. So we also have this challenge. We have 20% of people below poverty, and Peru is in this average. And are poor, sorry, 20% are poor and 6% are below poverty. So they live with less than $1 a day. So, and the COVID is changing everything, because COVID is bringing up 20% more people to poverty. So the average of CEPAL is that United Nations, that 20% more people will go below poverty. So we have all these challenges, and we don't have clear answers. Like, I'm asking questions and I don't have answers for most of these questions. One of the answers for this question is exactly what Alban asked and what we are talking. We need cooperation. Like, we need to mobilize. We need everybody to work together. We in development banks, a couple of weeks ago in Paris, we held an event with 450 development banks around the world. It's called Financing Commons. And one of the key outcomes of it is the need of cooperation, is the need of countries and banks and multilateral development banks and local banks to work together, to mobilize funds, focus mainly in environment, develop green growth, gender issues, using some of the tools that Maria said, technology. So this is one of the ways. This is one of the ways to mobilize all this amount of money and to make the development a green development. Another way is, of course, we need to work with civil society. We need to bring the attention to people. We need people to be participants. We need people to be part of the solution. People need to be in charge, need to be empowered. They need to feel that they can make the difference. And this can be worked through governments, can be worked through regulations, can be worked through the organized civil society. So this is another challenge that maybe, and that's a big maybe, that the COVID pandemic can change the mindset. So the COVID pandemic can bring us a new reality. So people saw that they don't need a car, they don't need a car to go to work. They can go walking, they can use the bike, they can understand that life is more than just consumption. This can be a good outcome of the COVID. Another answer and how they can work together. How can we overpass the green growth and based in growth needs and development needs and the COVID is that we have a big role in small and medium enterprises. So the banks are mobilizing a lot of money to recover after pandemic, the small and medium enterprises. And they play a really important role. So if we have this mass, because they're the ones that employ more people, like most of people in the countries are employed in small and medium enterprises. So if providing these loans, this money for these people, and we bring together a mentality, a way that the money should be focused through more inclusive, gender inclusive, young people inclusive, environmental inclusive. If we show that we can change the production through solar panels, that we can put solar panels in stores, that that they need to reuse the water, and of course, use the shared economy technology. This can be another answer. Of course, it's not easy. As I said, we need to invest 4 trillion a year in development. So 4 trillion is the GDP of Germany. So we need to invest a German in the world infrastructure to overcome the gap we have. So basically, we as development bank, we are working in this. All the other development banks are working together. We are bringing this more and more together. We are talking more. We are having more events, and also an event like this is really important because we bring different views, we bring different expertises, and this is again another answer to what Alban asked, that the cooperation shouldn't be only on top. So it's not only about government. It's not only about the Paris agenda. It's not only about Kyoto Protocol. It's not only about Rio 92. Not only about governments and international organizations. It's also about us. Like we need these conversations. We need a political science, talking with lawyers, talking with economists. We are all closing clusters. We don't talk to each other, and we think lawyers have the solution, but they forget about the economic part, and they forget about the public policies, and the public policies forget about everything, and the economists, they're just pessimistic, talking about numbers. And so we need these collaborations, and also so places like this are one of the solution to the challenge we have ahead, despite the COVID and this new reality we are facing the next years.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thank you very much for all the great information that you gave us. And I agree that we need collaboration, but I am kind of skeptic that this so easy, because here, for example, in our country, we need to have a real government with views and to face this global pandemic. And I wonder how collaboration, development banks as yours, you are working to can make this possible, make real. What do you think about that?
Yes, the dialogue, as you said, like, of course, the key decision makers are the politicians, but politicians are also elected by people, like in most of the countries, if not all of them, in a way or any other. Politicians are there because of their people. It can be by vote or it can be by pressure. So civil society has a real important power. As you see in Peru, as Andres was talking, like 5 presidents in 1 month. So this shows that people are not happy with what's happening in their countries. So of course, again, we have this lack of infrastructure. We have this gap of poverty. We have this 20% of people below poverty. The needs are really different, but civil society is getting more and more aware of these things. So again, this is a role of places like this, that we aware people. Like, we need to talk to people. We need to talk to our students. We need to talk to our fellows. We need to talk to in our communities. We have this responsibility. So it can look like, oh, you're too optimistic or too daydreaming because it's not like this, it didn't work. But if you see, again, what's happening in Peru, what happened in other countries, civil society, yes, they're changing, they're putting pressure, and mainly in democracies that people need the votes to be reelected. Civil society is changing a lot. Like, of course, we have goes and forth. We have a real mediatistic view. Like, we are always seeing, this year, semi-dictatorial government from right or from left enter in this country. But it's this year, and then like in 4 years, we'll have a new election, and we have a new view. And this is one of the good and bad things of democracy, that we have these changes, and changes lead to development in a way or the other. And also the banks, like talking about institutional, we're doing a lot of things. We are working together with European banks, with multilateral development banks. We are putting regulations. When we provide money to our countries, we put a series of regulations. We say we are putting environmental assessment. We are putting the need of a previous screening, environmental screening. We are asking that the projects have this adaptability or mitigation of environmental impact. We also providing cheaper loans and cheaper money for the countries that they invest in resilient infrastructure. So, for example, to give an example of my bank, if you make a linear park or a bikeway, the loan will be cheaper. So it's not just us, many of the banks. So if you're investing in solar panels, the money, you pay less interest. So if you pay less interest, of course, you have more willingness to approve this kind of projects. So of course, we can also be not that optimistic, and we can talk the money. So money talks. And if you have cheaper money to produce a solar panel or a hydropower plant, you will not do a coal plant. So because it's, in the end of the day, it's cheaper. So this is a long way. Of course, it's a long way. But if you look backwards, if you look 30 years ago, you had nothing of this. Like before Rio 92, like we are not talking about environment or gender. If you look 30, 40 years ago, most of the countries, women could not vote. And nowadays we think it's abnormal that a woman cannot vote. Women were not allowed this. And it's not a long time ago. We are kind of, all of us young here, we didn't live through this, so we don't see this. But these changes are really important. These changes takes time, but they are happening. And again, we are too immediatistic. We are always talking about today or tomorrow. We're forgetting about 5 to 10 years, and changes take time.
Thank you so much, Enrique. Yes, we have to be patient, probably. Please, if anyone of the other panelists wants to share, wants to ask anything to Enrique, please join us.
Susan, I have a little question for Enrique. Enrique, what do you think is the scenario for post-COVID green growth projects? For example, to keep the climate resilience, green growth. What do you think is the scenario for those kind of projects?
Yes, we again, I'm kind of optimistic because we have this change of mindset. People saw what they lost during the COVID. People really saw what they lost. They lost the freedom. They lost the contact with their relatives. They lost their pub with their friends. And of course, it's kind of connected with environmental degradation. Like how COVID came, it's still not clear. It's still an uncertainty, but most of the pandemics in the past, they jump from an animal to us is because we are closer to animals. Like if we go back to the, I don't know in English how to say that, but the black disease that almost destroyed half of the world, that a rat had a kind of a bug, that this bug jumped into us. It was because we are close to dirty places. It was more than 500 years ago or 300 years ago. And it was because of that. We had the bird flu, we had the pork flu, or I don't know, again, in English, how to say that. So all of this is because we are in contact with animals, is because we are closer to animals. And people realize this, that we cannot degrade the environment that much. So this is one of the things. And the other one is, again, we need this amount of money. We need money to rebuild our economies. And if this money comes with these conditions, we can change everything. If we need to focus, and we are focusing, all the banks are focused, small and medium enterprises, that this comes with a new mindset. It's the money comes with this. Also, the rating agencies, they are starting to, the private sector itself, the S&P and Moody's and everything, they are starting to consider ESGs as their rating measures. So they're viewing the governance, they're viewing the environmental, they are viewing the way these companies reply to social issues to assess the rating. So again, this is another way that things can change.
May I jump in to the conversation? Sorry.
I want to welcome Oscar Sumar. He just welcome Oscar, the Dean of the Universidad Científica del Sur. Now we can continue, please, Maria Antonieta,
okay.
with your
sorry the interruption. But just I would like to ask Enrique about his views regarding this long-term vision, because it's the way it should be, done. But sometimes it's quite difficult when you are facing changes in government every 4, 5, 6 years. So you are not looking at the long-term vision, because you are considering more nearer objectives, more showing objectives to show off a little bit, and because it's the way politicians act, and it's very common. So what do you think about, or how do you think it could be achieved, this way of merging the technical approach and the political approach in order to have long-term visions or more sustainable approaches to tackle this kind of topics?
We have this, it's not a joke, but it's a saying that we talk in development, and also engineers, and it's from the 60s, and it's all spread all over the world, that politicians, they invest in asphalt, and they don't invest in sanitation, because they can show the asphalt, they can show the new paving, but they cannot show the water and the sanitation below us. So because it's below the earth, so it doesn't bring votes, and it's not something new. Like my father used to talk about this. My father is an engineer. Like he didn't work in development, but they had this saying, and this saying we have until nowadays in our discussions. So yes, you're right. The short term and the showing off view is what what bring votes, and votes is what they elect them. But we are seeing, of course, when we see Latin America, things takes a while because we are developing countries. We are still developing. But we also mimetize what other countries bring. So we are seeing what is happening and what happened in Europe, what's happening in Asia, and it takes some time. But we are seeing that people are seeing what Singapore did. Like people are seeing. It's a great example for the world. Like Singapore is they changed a small island into maybe the most impressive city in the world. Right? So people are seeing, people are going, people are changing, and the pressure comes from people. We in Brazil, we had elections, municipal elections 1 week ago, and the changes are huge. Like the lawmakers, they were not. Most of them were not re-elected because people want new things. People are seeing new things. We have movements. You agree or not with the movement, but we have movements. Black Lives Matter. We have movements of women empowerment, and we didn't have it. This is one thing I really like to emphasize, that if we look 10 years ago, we didn't have this kind of movement, and would never imagine things like this would happen. And we're giving voice to people. So people are getting awareness of their need, and we need to stop just only relying on top-down answers. We don't need to think that all the solutions are on top. And if you see, like now we have this civil society consultations for every new building or every new road or any new development, any new infrastructure development, we need to consult with people. And we didn't have it 15 years ago. And we have it now. We also have this indigenous consultation. So when the ILO Convention 169, we have to consult with indigenous people when we are bringing projects that will impact their environment. So again, we need to take charge of this. We as civil society, we as Berkeley Global Society, we need to emphasize to the people that they don't need new asphalt. They need sanitation. They need green growth. That it's easier. It's better. It's not easier. What's easier is not better. And this is one of the problems of development, because sometimes people don't want the change that are good for them. But it's the challenge we have to face, and we have to work all together. And always bringing these best scenarios, bringing these best experiences, and show them. To see what's happening there, what's happening in Peru, that's good. What happened in Bolivia, that's good. Because not only the good outcomes come from Europe or United States. Most of them comes from poor countries, from developing countries, and from technology. Most of the technology are that the successful ones. Of course, we always see Facebook, Spotify, and everything, but we have other small interventions that bring up to fulfill a requirement and of poor people and poor society, like Bangladeshi small loans to poor people. Like we have this successful project. We have this kind of fintechs. We have now this mobile payments that brings inclusion to a lot of people. If you can pay by your phone, you don't need to have a bank account. You don't have to go to a bank. You don't have to have money. Of course, you need to have a cell phone, but you have some affordable cell phones nowadays. So this is one of the ways.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thank you very much for your kind answers. And thank you, Maria Antonieta, Andres. Now I'm going to pass to Dr. Oscar Sumar. He's the Dean from the Law Faculty at Universidad Científica del Sur. He's going to give us the final words to this roundtable. Adel, please go ahead, Oscar.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Susan. I am very happy to be here. Thanks, Susan, for the introduction. As a Berkeley Law alumnus, I am proud of being part of this event. I congratulate Susan for assembling this reunion and Oban for his leadership on Berkeley Global Society. The topic of this talk, environmental challenges, is dear to us. Científica Law School has a strong focus on environmental law. Actually, we are the only law school in the Latin American region with a focus on environmental law. This focus is evident in our curriculum. We offer more than 10 courses on environmental related topics. Also, we have an environmental law clinic, part of the Latin American League of Legal Clinics, and we are the organizers of the only environmental moot court competition in Peru. Actually, Professor Dulanto here, along with Professor San Martin, are the heads behind these programs. Also, we are very proud to mention our dual degree agreement with Pace University, one of the leaders in environmental law globally. The focus on the environment is not only a good choice, but a necessary commitment in a country like Peru. As you know, Peru is a mega diverse country and also depends a lot of mining activities. Mining is important and useful for our economic development, but it also represents a challenge to the environment and to the preservation of our original native culture, as you previously noted. But not only that, being this Berkeley Global Society reunion, I would say that the environmental preservation is the biggest challenge we face today as humans. Not only because of climate change, but because of other hazards that come with globalization and our disregard for the environment. COVID-19 is the most recent and relevant example of this. One person eating a wild animal in China affects the lives of every human on Earth. That is an environmental issue before a health crisis. Because of these reasons, I am glad we helped organizing this talk. I congratulate our speakers, especially Enrique, who joined us from Brazil, for their informative and interesting talks. Also, thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you soon and look forward for the next Global Society meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. And just to finish, yes, I guess that all of the panelists here believe that preserving the environment and having long-term regulations are going to give us more sustainable activities and long-time environmental for enjoy, for us, and for next generations. Thank you very much, Oban, again for having us, for giving us the opportunity to talk about our country, our regulations, and of course, with Enrique having the perspective from Brazil, our brother country. Thank you, María Antonieta, Andrés, and Oscar, and see you next time Thank you all the audience that give to us your time. See you next time, probably face to face.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Emma. You can switch off the YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I have 20 questions for everyone now. It was a very good conversation. Thank you, everyone.